My name is Sophia and I'm 32 years old. If you've ever had your own family look down on you for the work you do, if you've ever been made to feel less than because your job didn't fit their definition of success, and then got the last laugh in the most satisfying way possible, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel right now, because what happened at my cousin's engagement party will make you believe in perfect timing. Trust me, you need to hear how this unfolded. I grew up in Miami, Florida, where the heat is relentless and humid, where the air smells like salt water and Cuban coffee, where palm trees line streets filled with Art Deco buildings painted in pastel colors that look like they belong in a vintage postcard. My family is Cuban American, third generation, the kind of family where everyone gathers for loud Sunday dinners, where your business is everyone's business, and where success is measured in very specific ways. Doctor, lawyer, engineer, business owner. Anything less is viewed as a disappointment, a waste of potential, evidence that you're not living up to the family name. My parents came from humble beginnings. My grandfather arrived in Miami in the early 60s with nothing, worked in factories and construction sites, saved every penny, eventually opened a small grocery store in Little Havana that became the foundation for everything that came after. My father and his brothers expanded that single store into a chain of supermarkets across South Florida, building real wealth over decades of grinding work. By the time I was born, my family was comfortably upper middle class, living in a spacious house in Coral Gables with a pool and a 3-car garage, taking beach vacations every summer, never worrying about money. But that prosperity came with expectations, unspoken rules about what we were supposed to become to honor the sacrifices that had been made for us. My older brother Miguel became a lawyer, exactly as expected, joining a prestigious firm downtown and making my parents glow with pride every time they introduced him to their friends. My sister Carolina married a successful real estate developer and produced 2 perfect grandchildren, fulfilling her role in the family narrative. And then there was me, Sophia, the youngest, the one who was supposed to follow the script but kept going off book. I was always creative, always more interested in flavors and textures and the way food could tell stories than I was in the traditional career paths my family valued. I loved cooking, had loved it since I was small enough to stand on a step stool next to my abuela in the kitchen, watching her make ropa vieja and flan, learning the alchemy of transforming simple ingredients into something that could make people close their eyes in pleasure. I went to college because it was non-negotiable in my family, majored in business because my father insisted I needed something practical, but I spent all my elective credits on food science and culinary courses, working nights and weekends in restaurant kitchens, learning everything I could about the industry. My family viewed this as a phase, something I'd grow out of once I graduated and got a real job. When I told them I wanted to go to culinary school after finishing my bachelor's degree, my father actually laughed, said I'd spent 4 years getting a business degree just to become a cook, that I might as well have saved him the tuition money. My mother cried, worried about what her friends would think, about how she'd explain that her daughter was choosing to work in kitchens instead of offices. I went anyway. I took out loans and enrolled in the Culinary Institute of America in New York, spent 2 intense years learning classical French technique and modern innovation, working myself to exhaustion in kitchens where the standards were impossibly high and the criticism was constant and brutal. I loved every minute of it, even the hard parts, even the burns and cuts in the 18-hour days. I came back to Miami with my culinary degree and started working in restaurants, moving from place to place every year or 2, learning different cuisines and management styles, working my way up from line cook to sous chef. The pay was terrible, the hours were punishing, and I was constantly exhausted, but I was building something, accumulating knowledge and skills and connections that I knew would matter eventually. My family didn't see it that way. At family gatherings, I watched them introduce Miguel as a lawyer with the firm name dropped casually, introduce Carolina's husband and mention his latest development project, and then hesitate when they got to me, saying I worked in restaurants in this apologetic tone that made it clear they considered my career an embarrassment. My aunts and uncles would ask when I was going to get a real job, when I was going to use my business degree, whether I'd met any nice professional men at these restaurants or just other kitchen workers. The implication was always there. I'd wasted my education and their family's reputation on something frivolous, something beneath us. It got worse when I turned 30 and took a job as a server. I'd been working as a sous chef at a high-end restaurant in Brickell, but the head chef was a nightmare, verbally abusive and unstable, and the kitchen environment was toxic in ways that were affecting my mental health. I quit without another position lined up, which my family viewed as more evidence of my poor decision-making. I needed income while I figured out my next move, so I took a serving position at a beautiful restaurant in Coconut Grove. The place was called Mariposa, an upscale establishment in a converted historic house with a lush garden patio, known for innovative Latin fusion cuisine and an extensive wine list. The money was actually good, better than I'd made as a sous chef when you factored in tips, and the atmosphere was professional and respectful, such a relief after the abusive kitchen I'd left. But my family was horrified. At 30 years old with a bachelor's degree and a culinary degree, I was waiting tables. It was the ultimate proof that I'd failed, that all my choices had led to this embarrassing dead end. My mother stopped mentioning what I did when her friends asked, just changed the subject quickly. My father made pointed comments about wasted potential whenever I saw him. My brother Miguel suggested I could probably get an entry-level position at his firm, maybe in the mailroom or as a receptionist, something with benefits and a path forward. My sister Carolina set me up on dates with men she described as stable and successful, implying I needed to marry my way out of the hole I'd dug for myself. The worst was my cousin Vanessa. She was my age, worked in pharmaceutical sales, made good money, and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of her success. At family gatherings she'd ask about my waitressing with this exaggerated sympathy, saying things like, "It must be so hard being on your feet all day," or, "At least you're staying busy while you figure out what you really want to do." She made sure everyone within earshot knew that her younger cousin, the one with 2 degrees, was serving people their dinner for a living. Her mother, my Aunt Elena, was just as bad, making comments about how some people were late bloomers, how it was never too late to get your life together, all while looking at me with pity. I endured it because they were family, because walking away from family gatherings would have caused even more drama and judgment. But it hurt, constantly being made to feel like a failure, like a disappointment, like my work didn't matter because it wasn't prestigious enough for their standards. What they didn't know, what none of them knew because I'd stopped trying to explain my career to people who didn't respect it, was that I wasn't just serving at Mariposa. I was working there very deliberately, learning the front-of-house operations of one of Miami's most successful restaurants, studying their systems and guest experience and business model. Because I had a plan, one I was executing carefully and quietly without my family's input or approval. I'd been saving for years, living in a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood my family considered beneath me, driving a 10-year-old car, putting away every extra dollar I could. I'd also been building relationships in Miami's restaurant community, earning the respect of chefs and owners and investors who understood what I was trying to build. 6 months before I took the serving job at Mariposa, I'd met a successful restaurateur named Marcus Chin at an industry event. He owned several acclaimed restaurants in Miami and was looking for a partner on a new concept he wanted to develop, something focusing on elevated Cuban cuisine, honoring traditional flavors and techniques while bringing in modern innovation and presentation. Marcus had heard about me through the industry grapevine, knew about my training and my experience and my work ethic. He'd tasted my food at a pop-up dinner I'd done to test some concepts, and he'd been impressed enough to propose a partnership. He'd provide the majority of the funding and his business expertise, and I'd be the chef and creative director, developing the menu and running the kitchen. We'd be equal partners in ownership, splitting profits after expenses. It was the opportunity I'd been working toward for over a decade, the chance to build something that was truly mine. But restaurants are risky, and even with Marcus's investment, I needed more capital. I needed to prove I understood not just cooking but the entire business, front and back of house. That's why I'd taken the serving job at Mariposa, to fill those knowledge gaps while earning money to add to my investment fund. Marcus and I were in the final stages of planning, scouting locations, finalizing the business plan, working with architects and designers. We were maybe 3 months from signing a lease and starting renovations. I hadn't told my family any of this because I'd learned that they didn't believe in my judgment or my abilities, and I didn't want to hear their doubts and warnings while I was trying to build something fragile and important. Then came Vanessa's engagement party. She was marrying a corporate attorney she'd met through work, and the engagement was being celebrated with a lavish party at her parents' house in Pinecrest, their sprawling property with a pool and outdoor kitchen and enough space to host 100 guests comfortably. The invitations went out 2 months in advance, and my mother called me immediately to make sure I was coming, emphasizing that the whole family would be there, that it would look bad if I didn't show up. I agreed to go, dreading it but knowing I couldn't skip such a major family event without causing irreparable damage. The party was on a Saturday evening in late October, when Miami's weather finally shifts from unbearably hot to merely warm, when you can actually be outside after sunset without melting. My aunt and uncle had hired a catering company, set up a bar with a professional bartender, strung lights through the trees in their backyard, created this elegant party atmosphere. Guests started arriving at 7 and I showed up right on time, wearing a simple but nice dress I'd bought on sale, carrying a carefully chosen bottle of wine as a gift. The usual family dynamics were immediately apparent. Miguel was there with his wife, both of them dressed expensively, talking to my father about a case he was working on. Carolina and her husband were corralling their kids near the pool, and Carolina's dress and jewelry probably cost more than I made in 2 months of serving. Vanessa was in her element, wearing a designer cocktail dress and a huge engagement ring, floating from group to group with her fiancé, accepting congratulations and admiration. My mother introduced me to relatives I hadn't seen in a while, and I watched her deflect questions about what I was doing, saw her embarrassment when she couldn't avoid admitting I was working at a restaurant. About an hour into the party, while I was getting a drink at the bar, Vanessa came up with 2 of her friends, women I didn't know but who had that same polished, professional appearance. Vanessa introduced me as her cousin who worked in food service, and one of her friends asked if I was a chef. Before I could answer, Vanessa laughed and said no, I was a waitress, that I'd spent all this money on culinary school and ended up serving other people's food. She said it loud enough that several family members nearby turned to look, and I saw my mother's face flush with secondhand shame. One of Vanessa's friends made a sympathetic noise and said at least restaurants need servers, that it's honest work. The condescension was suffocating. Vanessa continued, saying she kept hoping I'd figure things out, maybe go back to school for something more practical, that it wasn't too late to start over. My Aunt Elena joined our circle then, putting her hand on my shoulder and saying they all just wanted to see me successful and settled, that they worried about my future. She said this in front of Vanessa's friends, in front of cousins and family friends who were all listening now, and I felt like I was being displayed as a cautionary tale, the family member who'd made all the wrong choices. I could have told them right then about the restaurant, about the partnership with Marcus, about everything I'd been building. But I didn't. Something stopped me, some instinct that said the timing wasn't right, that announcing it here in the middle of Vanessa's engagement party would look defensive, like I was trying to steal her spotlight or prove something. So I smiled tightly and excused myself, walking away before I said something I'd regret, before the anger and humiliation bubbling up inside me spilled over in front of everyone. I found a quiet corner of the yard and checked my phone, scrolling mindlessly just to have something to do with my hands. There was a text from Marcus asking if we could meet the next morning to finalize some menu details. And responding to that, thinking about the restaurant and the future I was building, helped calm the storm of emotions. I stayed at the party for another hour, mostly avoiding my family, talking to a few cousins I actually liked, counting down until I could leave without it being obvious I was fleeing. As I was getting ready to go, my Uncle Carlos, my father's brother and Vanessa's father, pulled me aside. He'd had a few drinks and was in that expansive mood alcohol sometimes creates. He told me he was proud of Vanessa, that she'd done everything right, built a good career, found a good man, was setting herself up for a stable future. Then he said he knew I'd struggled to find my path, that it must be hard watching my siblings and cousins succeed while I was still figuring things out, but that there was no shame in simple work. He meant it kindly, I think, but the pity in his voice was crushing. He offered to talk to someone he knew who was hiring for administrative positions at a medical supply company, said maybe I could get out of the restaurant industry, find something with a future. I thanked him for thinking of me, said I was actually happy with where things were going, and left before he could press further. Driving home through Miami's neon-lit streets, past the tourists and the club-goers and the restaurants with people spilling onto sidewalk patios, I cried angry tears. I was furious at my family for their constant judgment, at myself for caring what they thought, at the situation that put me in a position where I couldn't defend myself without revealing plans that weren't ready to be revealed. I called my best friend Lucia when I got home, ranted for an hour about the party and my family and the suffocating weight of their expectations and disappointment. Lucia, who'd been my friend since culinary school and understood the restaurant industry in ways my family never would, told me the same thing she'd been telling me for years. Their opinions didn't matter, their definition of success wasn't the only valid one, and soon enough I'd have proof that my path had been right all along. She reminded me that in 3 months, maybe less, I'd be opening my own restaurant as a co-owner and executive chef, and that success would speak louder than any argument I could make. She was right, but that night, lying in my studio apartment listening to my neighbors through the thin walls, it was hard to believe things would ever change. The next 3 months were a blur of work and planning. During the day I served at Mariposa, learning everything I could about running a dining room efficiently, about managing guest expectations, about the 1,000 small details that made the difference between a good restaurant and a great one. During my off hours I worked with Marcus on our restaurant, which we'd decided to call Races, meaning roots in Spanish, a tribute to the traditional Cuban cuisine we'd be elevating. We found a perfect location in the Design District, a neighborhood that had transformed over the past decade from industrial warehouses into a hub for art galleries, high-end retail, and innovative dining. The space had been a furniture showroom, all exposed brick and high ceilings and huge windows, and we worked with designers to transform it into a warm, sophisticated restaurant that felt both modern and rooted in Cuban heritage. I developed the menu obsessively, testing and refining each dish dozens of times. I wanted to honor the food of my childhood, the recipes my abuela had taught me, but presented with the technique and innovation I'd learned through years of training. Ropa vieja deconstructed and plated like fine French cuisine. Lechon with a mojo glaze that had been reduced and intensified until each bite was an explosion of citrus and garlic. Yuca gnocchi so light they almost floated. Flan with flavors like café cubano and guava that somehow tasted exactly like Miami felt. Every dish told a story, connected to memory and tradition while pushing forward into something new. We hired a team carefully, bringing in experienced cooks and servers and bartenders who understood our vision. Marcus handled the business operations while I focused on the kitchen and menu, and we worked together surprisingly well, respecting each other's expertise and decision-making. As opening day approached, the local food media started paying attention. Marcus had relationships with restaurant critics and food writers, and they were intrigued by the concept, by my background, by what we were trying to do. We scheduled a soft opening for friends and family and industry insiders, a chance to work out any kinks before the official launch. I still hadn't told my family. Part of it was superstition, not wanting to jinx things by announcing them too early. Part of it was protecting myself, not wanting to hear their doubts or deal with their questions about whether I knew what I was doing. And part of it, I'll admit, was spite, wanting to wait until there was undeniable proof of success before revealing what I'd been building while they'd been pitying me. So while my family thought I was still just serving tables at Mariposa, I was actually in the final stages of opening a restaurant where I was the chef and co-owner, where my name would be on the door and in the reviews, where everything I'd worked for over the past decade was about to become real. The soft opening was scheduled for a Wednesday evening in late January. We'd invited about 50 people, including several local food critics who Marcus knew, some of his investor friends and key figures from Miami's restaurant community. And I'd invited my family, all of them sending formal invitations to my parents, my siblings, my aunts and uncles and cousins. The invitation was elegant, embossed, announcing the opening of Races and inviting them to join us for a special preview evening. It didn't explicitly state that I was the chef and co-owner, just said Sofia Reyes and Marcus Chin invite you to experience Races, with the date and address. My mother called when she received the invitation, confused. She asked if I was working at this new restaurant, if I'd gotten a serving job there. I told her no, I wasn't working there as a server, and that she should come to the event if she wanted to know more. I could hear the frustration in her voice at my vagueness, but I didn't elaborate. I sent the same response to my siblings and extended family who reached out with similar questions. Just come to the opening, I said, and you'll understand everything. The day of the soft opening, I was at the restaurant by 9 in the morning, prepping with my team, going over every detail obsessively. The space looked beautiful, exactly as we'd envisioned it. The dining room had been transformed with warm lighting and comfortable seating, the walls decorated with contemporary Cuban art from local artists. The open kitchen was spotless and organized, ready for service. The smell of sofrito filled the air as we started cooking, that foundational aroma of garlic and peppers and onions that forms the base of so much Cuban cuisine. Guests started arriving at 7. I was in the kitchen finishing final preparations, but I'd positioned myself where I could see into the dining room through the pass. I watched my family arrive in clusters, looking around with curiosity and confusion. My mother was dressed beautifully as always, And my father wore a guayabera that he reserved for special occasions. Miguel and Carolina came with their spouses. My aunts and uncles filed in, including Vanessa's parents. And Vanessa herself arrived fashionably late with her fiancé, wearing another expensive dress and looking around the restaurant with obvious assessment. They were seated at a large table we'd reserved for them, given menus and drink orders taken by our professional service staff. I watched them look at the menu, saw their surprise at the ambitious dishes and the upscale pricing. I heard fragments of conversation drifting back to the kitchen, my family speculating about why I'd invited them here, whether I was working here, whether this was some kind of announcement about a new job. None of them had put it together yet, hadn't noticed my name on the menu beneath each dish description, hadn't registered that the invitation had come from me in a way that suggested something more than just a server inviting people to check out her workplace. Marcus came into the kitchen, told me it was time. The plan was for me to cook and plate the tasting menu we'd designed for the evening, and then after the main courses were served, I'd come out and address the guests, explain the restaurant's concept and my role in it. My hands were shaking slightly as I started cooking, but the familiar rhythms of the kitchen calmed me. This was what I knew how to do, what I'd trained for years to do well. Each dish that went out to the dining room was perfect, exactly as I'd envisioned it. I watched through the kitchen window as my family ate, saw their faces change as they tasted the food. My father, who was notoriously hard to impress, closed his eyes after the first bite of the lechon, and I saw him say something to my mother. Vanessa photographed every dish before tasting it, and even from the kitchen I could see her surprise at the quality and presentation. The food critics at nearby tables were making notes, and the industry people were nodding approvingly between bites. It was working. Everything was working exactly as it should. After the main courses were cleared and before dessert service, Marcus stood up in the dining room and got everyone's attention. He introduced himself and thanked everyone for coming to celebrate the opening of Races. He talked about the restaurant's concept, about honoring Cuban culinary traditions while pushing them forward, about creating a dining experience that was both rooted in heritage and excitingly innovative. And then he said that none of this would have been possible without his partner, the creative force behind every dish they'd eaten tonight, and he asked me to come out from the kitchen. I took off my chef's coat, smoothed down my hair and walked into the dining room. The moment my family recognized me, understood what was happening, was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's eyebrows shot up in shock. Miguel and Carolina looked at each other in confusion and then back at me. My aunts and uncles stared openly. And Vanessa's face went through a rapid series of expressions. Confusion, realization, shock, and then something that looked almost like panic as she understood the implications of what she was seeing. Marcus introduced me as his partner and the executive chef of Races, the person who'd developed every dish on the menu, who'd been planning and working toward this moment for years. He talked about my training and experience, about the vision I'd brought to the project, about how excited he was to launch this restaurant with me. The room applauded, the industry people and critics who understood what an achievement this was, and slowly my family joined in, still looking stunned. I spoke briefly, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I talked about growing up Cuban American in Miami, about learning to cook from my abuela, about wanting to honor those traditions while bringing my own training and perspective to them. I thanked Marcus for believing in me and giving me this opportunity. And I thanked my family for coming, for being here to see the culmination of everything I'd been working toward. I didn't mention the years of judgment and disappointment, didn't point out that while they'd been pitying me for serving tables, I'd actually been preparing to open my own restaurant. I didn't need to. The contrast was obvious to everyone in the room. Dessert was served, my deconstructed flan that had people literally gasping at the first spoonful, and then guests started mingling. My family surrounded me, everyone talking at once. My mother was crying, hugging me and apologizing for not understanding, for not supporting me the way she should have. My father looked shell-shocked but proud, shaking my hand formally and then pulling me into an uncharacteristic hug. Miguel kept saying he had no idea, that he'd thought I was just serving. Why hadn't I told him? Carolina wanted to know every detail, when this had started, how long I'd been planning it, why I'd kept it secret. My aunts and uncles were effusive with congratulations, and I could see them recalculating their perception of me in real time, revising the narrative from disappointing family member to successful entrepreneur. Several of them mentioned that they'd always known I was talented, that they'd always believed in me, revisions of history that would have been funny if they weren't so transparent. But the sweetest moment was watching Vanessa process what had happened. She came up to congratulate me, her fiancé in tow, and I could see her struggling to find words. She said the food was incredible, that she'd had no idea I was planning something like this, that it was all so impressive. The superiority was gone from her voice, replaced by something that sounded almost like envy. Her mother, my Aunt Elena, was even more satisfying. She pulled me aside and said she'd always known I had potential, that she'd told everyone I'd find my way eventually, completely rewriting her years of pitying comments and concerns. She asked if we were hiring, said her friend's daughter needed a job and it would be such an honor to work at my restaurant. The irony of her asking me for a favor, treating my restaurant as a prestigious opportunity, when just months ago she'd been worried about my future as a mere server, was almost too much. The evening continued with guests complimenting the food, critics asking questions about my background and my culinary philosophy, industry people talking about the potential for Races to become a destination restaurant. Marcus and I worked the room together and I felt this profound sense of arrival, of vindication, of finally being seen for who I actually was rather than judged for what I wasn't. When the last guests finally left around midnight, my family lingering until the end, I collapsed into a chair in the empty dining room and just breathed. Marcus sat down across from me, grinning. He said it had been perfect, better than he'd hoped, that the reactions had been universally positive and he expected we'd be booked solid for months once word got out. He asked how it felt to finally show my family what I'd been building and I told him the truth. It felt like taking off a weight I'd been carrying for years, like finally being able to stand up straight. He raised his glass in a toast, to Races and to proving doubters wrong, and we sat there in my restaurant surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd worked for, and I felt more myself than I had in years. The next morning I woke up to dozens of text messages from family members, all saying versions of the same thing. They were proud of me, they were sorry for doubting me, they couldn't wait to come back to the restaurant. My mother sent a long message about how she'd stayed up all night thinking about all the times she'd discouraged me, all the ways she'd failed to support my dreams and how sorry she was. My father's message was shorter but no less meaningful. He said he'd been wrong about my choices, that I'd proven I knew what I was doing, and that he was proud to be my father. But the message that struck me most was from Vanessa. She said she'd been thinking about all the times she'd made comments about my serving job, all the ways she'd treated my career as less than hers, and she felt terrible about it. She said she'd been wrong, that she hadn't understood what I was building, and that she hoped I could forgive her. The apology felt genuine, and I appreciated it even though it didn't erase the years of condescension. I wrote back something polite and neutral, accepting her apology but not pretending that everything was suddenly fine between us. Races opened to the public 2 weeks later, and the response exceeded even our optimistic projections. We were booked solid for the first 2 months based on word of mouth and early reviews alone. The local food critics wrote glowing pieces, praising the inventive menu and the sophisticated execution of traditional flavors. We got written up in national food magazines, featured in articles about Miami's evolving culinary scene. Celebrity chefs visiting Miami made reservations. Food bloggers and Instagram influencers posted about us constantly, their followers flooding our phone lines trying to book tables. My family became my biggest promoters, telling everyone they knew about my restaurant, bringing friends and business associates for dinner, posting about Races on their social media. My mother framed one of the first review articles and hung it in her living room. My father added me to his company's executive network, introducing me to potential investors and business contacts. Miguel wanted advice on planning a firm event at the restaurant. Carolina threw her daughter's birthday party in our private dining room. The family members who'd pitted me for serving tables now bragged about having a chef and restaurant owner in the family. The transformation in how they treated me was complete and a little surreal. I'd gone from the disappointing cousin to the successful entrepreneur overnight in their eyes, even though nothing about my actual work or dedication or talent had changed. What had changed was their ability to understand and value what I did, to see it through the lens of achievement they respected. Ownership, recognition, financial success. Part of me resented that it had taken such obvious, undeniable success for them to respect me, that my years of hard work in kitchens hadn't been enough to earn their support. But mostly I was just relieved to finally be past it, to no longer be the subject of their worry and pity and subtle mockery. 6 months after we opened, Races earned its first major award, being named one of the best new restaurants in Miami by a prestigious food magazine. Marcus and I attended the awards ceremony together, and my entire family showed up to support me, filling 2 tables near the front. When they announced Races as a winner and I walked up to accept the award, I looked out at the audience and saw my parents on their feet applauding, my mother crying again, my father beaming with obvious pride. I saw my siblings and cousins and aunts and uncles all celebrating, and I thought about how different this moment would have felt if they'd supported me from the beginning, if I'd had their encouragement during the hard years instead of just their judgment. But I also thought about how satisfying it was to have done this on my own terms, without their approval or their understanding, to have proven that my path was valid even when everyone around me doubted it. There's something powerful about succeeding despite the odds, about moving forward when the people closest to you think you're making mistakes. It taught me to trust myself, to value my own assessment of what matters over other people's narrow definitions of success. And it made this moment, standing on that stage accepting an award for the restaurant I'd built, sweeter than it would have been if everything had been easy. In the year since we opened, Races has become exactly what we hoped it would be. A destination restaurant that honors Cuban culinary traditions while pushing them forward. A place where people come for special occasions and leave with memories of extraordinary food and experiences. We've expanded our team and I'm mentoring young cooks the way I wish someone had mentored me, teaching them that this work matters, that cooking is a legitimate career worthy of respect and dedication. We're planning a second location, maybe in Wynwood, and Marcus and I are already in talks with investors who want to back the expansion. My relationship with my family has settled into something more honest and respectful than it was before. They understand now that my choices weren't mistakes, that I was building towards something they couldn't see. We don't talk about the years of judgment and disappointment, don't explicitly acknowledge the ways they failed to support me, but the change in how they treat me makes it clear they've learned something. My mother asks about my work with genuine interest now. My father introduces me to his business contacts as a successful entrepreneur. My siblings treat me as an equal rather than a struggling younger sister who needs guidance. And Vanessa, to her credit, has never made another condescending comment about my career, has actually asked for my advice on career decisions of her own. I'm 33 now and I own a successful restaurant that's earned critical acclaim and financial success. I work constantly, the hours are still punishing, the pressure is still intense, but it's mine. I built this from the ground up, through years of training and grunt work and saving and planning, through refusing to give up even when the people closest to me thought I was wasting my potential. Every time I walk into Races and see the dining room full of happy guests eating food I created, every time a critic writes a glowing review or a customer tells me their meal was the best they've ever had, every time I stand in my kitchen directing my team through a busy service, I remember that girl serving tables while her family pitied her, and I feel grateful for the journey even though parts of it were painful. The truth is, I don't regret keeping my plans secret from my family during those final months before the opening. They'd given me no reason to trust them with my dreams, no indication that they'd support me rather than doubt me. By waiting to reveal Races until it was real and undeniable, until there was no room for them to question or discourage me, I protected something precious during its most vulnerable stage. And I gave myself the gift of that moment at the soft opening, watching their faces change as they realized what I'd built, seeing them understand that they'd been wrong about me all along. That moment of recognition, of vindication, was worth all the months of carrying the secret alone. So yes, my family mocked me for working as a waitress, treated my job like evidence of failure, pitted me for wasting my education and my potential on something so beneath their standards. And then they found out whose restaurant it really was, discovered that the cousin they'd been feeling sorry for was actually a chef and co-owner opening one of Miami's hottest new restaurants, that the waitress they'd dismissed was actually an entrepreneur building something remarkable. The irony is perfect, the kind of poetic justice that almost seems too neat to be real. But it happened, every bit of it, and I'm grateful for all of it, even the painful parts, because they made me strong enough to succeed despite the doubts, resourceful enough to build something without support, confident enough to trust my own vision over everyone else's limitations. If you made it all the way through my story, thank you for being here with me for every moment of it. If this story spoke to you, if you've ever been underestimated or judged for the work you do, I'd love if you'd leave a like on this video. It helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. And if you stuck around until the very end, drop a comment saying this message was for me, so I know you were here. There are so many more stories about proving doubters wrong and building the life you want on your own terms waiting to be told. So if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button. There's another story coming up next that I think is going to resonate just as deeply, so I'll see you there.